Good evening, or maybe late afternoon. It's just gone 6 o'clock here on the live Facebook stream. So good afternoon, or maybe good evening, everyone. It's just gone 6 o'clock on this live Facebook stream. Very excited if you have been able to join us live, and you can interact with the chat, send some more questions, some comments, perhaps some of your own experiences to add to the discussion. And if you've not been able to join us live, then welcome to the catch-up. And I hope there's things you can get from this, despite it not being the live version, and you can have a look at the comments. Any queries, you're welcome to message me on Twitter, or perhaps Facebook messages or emails to SR UK. I want to say thank you to the SR UK team for inviting me and giving me this session. It's the first time I've done one of these Facebook Lives like this, so bear with me. And I should say my name's Will Gregory, consultant physiotherapist working here at Salford Royal. And we've got a specialist interest in Scleroderma and Raynaud's in Salford, so I'm blessed with very enthusiastic colleagues who've kind of enthused me in the management of these conditions. And I'm just coming past year 15 of being the lead physio, helping with these things. So hopefully I've got some useful experience and some answers to the questions that have come through. Now, there is a button I meant to be pressing here that allows donations to happen, and I think that's got to be an important part of what I'm doing, because SR UK, probably like all of our charities at the moment, are probably struggling with some of their usual donation streams. Yeah, not massively obvious. Oh, and there's the first hello. Hello, Kim. Fancy that. It's nice to see familiar faces coming through on the Facebook stream there. And yeah, very good locations as well. Thank you. So we made it to London and Winchester. Oh, and Chapel Allerton, Leeds. Hello, local-ish to us here in Salford. So we've had 10 questions that were submitted before today, and then another 6 or so have come through today. So thanks very much for sending some bits and pieces in. I should say I do have a little bit of help in that Paula Manning, a kind of acquaintance of mine through the physio world, who more recently has been diagnosed with scleroderma, has kindly volunteered to help me with some of the posting of the links to the suggestions I'm going to talk through today. So I think there's probably 7 or 8 links that will come up on the feed for you to go and do some more research into the things I've talked through, which you can do now, or perhaps later on when you come back to this, the links will remain there. So I think that's everything I needed to do introduction-wise. So let's go straight into question number 1. And I'm taking these as they fell through to us. So the first question is it safe to exercise with scleroderma? And I kind of have to say, yeah, it is safe. Otherwise, I wouldn't have that element of my job. There's this interesting theory that goes on with regards to what happens in the first 18 months, perhaps, of your scleroderma becoming apparent, which might be, some journey before it actually gets diagnosed. But within that first 18 months, it tends to be a more aggressive version with regards to the skin thickening and the limitations that can happen to that. And there is a hint that if you overdo it with your stretches or are too aggressive with forcing movements during that early stage, you could do yourself more harm than good. But once you're beyond that 18-month stage, certainly so far as stretches go, yeah, you can push it. And actually what's been found is the benefit you get from stretching the tight skin or the tissues around the skin in scleroderma is more if you are able to put that extra bit of pressure on, so stretch the hand and then force it that bit further, give it that push with the other hand. It can help to give you more stretching. So actually it's probably being more aggressive rather than less aggressive. Having said that, listen to your body. The digital ulcers are a big problem. with some people, for some people with scleroderma, and if you have got an ulcer, that can make it very difficult to do your usual kind of routine. And you need to just be mindful of not aggravating the digital ulcers. And equally, stretch-wise, if it's uncomfortable, perhaps it's a sign it's a bit too much all at once. There is a program of stretches that I wrote a good number of years ago that's now available as a text exercise sheet via SRUK, and we'll put the link up there as and when we've got the technology to do that. I have got some pictorial versions of that as well, for those of you that are more visual with how you think about those things. But it's a kind of a body-wide MOT to stretch off all the parts of your body and ensure there's no stiffness. And if you do find some tightness there, you can then sorry, I'm reading all of these lovely messages as I'm going. If you do find some tightness, then you could do it more regularly. Yeah, let me put a few more shout outs whilst I'm in the middle of that exercise. So hello, Edith. Nice to see you online. And messaging from Glossop, we've got Hull mentioned, Watford. Hi from the northeast. Very good. We're meeting perhaps all four corners of the country. Yeah, Bristol down there. Hello, Lindsay. And oh, some questions coming through already. Great, thank you. So I was halfway through, is it safe to exercise? So I've talked a little bit about stretching, which perhaps with the tightness we do tend to see in scleroderma is the most obvious component. But the other thing is the more recent research has really shown that it's important to think about your cardiovascular fitness, your heart and lungs, and getting the most out of them. There's some further questions about what happens if you do have limited lung function that I'm going to come on to a bit later. But from a general point of view, all of the studies that have been done looking at aerobic exercise in scleroderma imply that it is doable. So long as you find the right level for your particular version of the condition, you can manage initially maybe light, but then moving up your exercise from a cardiovascular, heart and lungs point of view. Okay, we'll come back to that, I'm sure. So I'll move on to the next question, which is probably a lot more topical. The questioner asks, I have a diagnosis of scleroderma, and I should say we have got questions about Raynaud's coming up, so don't feel this is scleroderma talk. We're going to cover both of those conditions and the combinations of. So this question is, I have a diagnosis of scleroderma, and currently I'm shielding at home. Please can you suggest suitable exercises that will help my condition and keep me active during self-isolation? So this is where we are at the moment. We're, what, 7-8 weeks into the lockdown. Perhaps quite a few of you will be shielding and very much stuck at home. Others, you might have been having the 1 hour a day exercise that was allowable until yesterday. Or some of you may have embraced the new rule change as of yesterday, where you can have unlimited exercise, which even I might think is a little bit over the top. But there we go. There are certainly opportunities with how we're living at the moment to think about your exercise. Having said that, there was a really nice article in our physiotherapy journal or online journal that came out last night or this morning, and this is Anna Lowe, who works in a public health team for the AHPs for public health, and she's just pulled together some data that showed this survey after 2 weeks of lockdown. There was 45,000 people asked about their lockdown experience, and they painted rather a mixed picture. So 1 in 4 reported they weren't exercising at all, which is a bit of a shame. And then there was a Sport England survey a bit more recently where 41% of respondents said they were doing a bit less activity rather than more in lockdown. And actually those people who had long-standing health conditions were less likely to be regularly active. So whilst it's a different routine at the moment, it's not necessarily more exercise. So yeah, what can you do if your usual routine is exercise outside? How do you adapt to that with our current restrictions? I think it's important just to know what your levels are, and this is something we talk about quite a lot in physio, is trying to find what your current exercise level is, what's enough for you to be able to do every day, or perhaps every odd day if it's more vigorous kind of aerobic exercise or resistance work, and finding that level and then maintaining that through alternative means. If cycling's your passion, well, if you're lucky, you have an exercise bike, but if not, some other way to maintain that fitness in something you enjoy. And what's consistently shown in pretty much all exercise studies in regards to rheumatology as a broader bed of research is that the best exercise is something you enjoy. So whatever you choose, it needs to be something that will continue in the longer run. And there's lots of studies where they show the best exercises for a certain diagnosis, and they do it for 6 weeks, and then at the end of the 6 weeks, everyone's improved. But then 3 months later, only those that are improved, the only people that are improved are those that have sustained that exercise. So it needs to be something that kind of works for you. So if you've got stairs at home, you can probably get a fairly decent workout up and down stairs. It could be you take it to extremes and think about how long the length of your garden is, or if you are able to get out, how far your daily walk can be to push yourself with that. There's a really nice online resource that I've been recommending for a number of years. It's slightly changed now, and you have to log in, put your details in to use it now. But Map My Walk allows you to put in your postcode, and then you get a Google Maps version of your local area, and you can pin the points that you'd like to walk, and it will tell you precisely what distance that is. So if you do want to get fitter, or if you want to gradually improve your fitness, then thinking about what your current tolerable difference is, and then gradually taking it up from that. The other thing that's quite nice on that resource is you can type into it, this is where I live, and I want to do a 700-meter walk, and it will tell you from your door which roads you walk on and how you walk back. So it allows you just to keep tabs on your activity levels. So that's a little bit of what you can do in your kind of outdoor exercise. But for your indoor exercise, yeah, if you can do some cardiovascular, and there's some nice resources that NHS England have got on their website. I think I saw a mention of Scotland earlier, and possibly the Republic of Ireland popped up earlier as well. So I'm sure you're allowed to use the NHS England website, and apologies that I haven't looked at the equivalent resources in other countries, but the NHS England website has some good home-based exercise videos. It's also got Active 10. So you may have heard of the Couch to 5K program, which is a great resource if you're aiming to end up at running or at least jogging 5 kilometers. If you think that's possibly a bit of a step too far, then the Active 10 just helps you and encourages you to do 10 minutes of exercise a day, and it gives you targets, and it's not quite sticker charts, but you get prizes for achieving it, which sounds a bit ridiculous, but actually anything that can improve your motivation. And perhaps that's why people aren't as active in lockdown, is that motivation is a challenge, and particularly at this stage where it feels like it's gone on for a long time, sometimes having those external prompts to keep us exercising can be important. Okay, question number 3. So this has come in asking about, this person said, I suffer from poor posture and back pain, and I'm concerned that self-isolation and lack of exercise will make my condition worse. So what advice do you have for someone who has these issues? Yeah, so poor posture and back pain, and perhaps there's something in your usual life before the coronavirus limitations came in that was giving you a better posture or controlling the back pain that's now removed by the sounds of that question. Yeah, lack of exercise is mentioned. And it could be that your favourite form of exercise is in a swimming pool, and of course they're all closed at the moment. But I suppose this period is a window of opportunity to think about, I can't do my usual, what other habits could I pick up? And if you do find there's an exercise resource online that works for you, and it becomes, if it's the Active 10 of 10 minutes a day, or something like that, then that will become a habit over the next 4 weeks or however long it is we're all in this altered situation. And then you can add in your swimming on top of that when the pool's back open again, and you've got 2 enjoyable exercise habits. Poor posture and back pain. I mean, if the scleroderma is affecting kind of your chest area and there's tight skin in this area, that can lead to problems with posture because there's that tendency to pull forwards through there. Working on re-educating your posture should be a regular habit. So kind of if you're sat at a desk like I am at the moment, it could be every 10-15 minutes you have a prompt to remind you just to work on your posture and sit upright and make sure you're not gradually sinking down. So it could be every time you open a new document or every time you make a phone call, or even just a reminder on your computer if you're sat on a computer that pings up every 20 minutes just to give you that prompt on your posture. There's a few people I've spoken to who are having more back pain because suddenly, instead of a fairly well adapted office, they're now working at home on their dining table on peculiar furniture, or certainly furniture that's not designed to be sat on all day long. So it's worth thinking about your workspace if that's aggravating your back pain there. So, okay, question number 4. My scleroderma is limiting my movement. Are there exercises I can adapt to help make me physically active? Yeah, definitely there are. And I'd say ordinarily, I'd say this is the role of the physiotherapist. So your physiotherapist has the skills to look at your diagnosis and look at what the best exercises would be for that kind of a problem, but adapt them to you and your particular version of it. If you have problems with perhaps weight bearing through one hand, or that's taking the weight through the hand, so we couldn't work on areas around that, or you have movement limitations at the shoulder or the fingers that mean we have to work on things differently, that's fine. That's something we can work on. However, number 1, you won't have access to a physiotherapist face to face at the moment, and number 2, even then, it may be a challenge, or it may be a long wait to get in. So I think it's worth thinking about scleroderma specific exercises. So like I said, the SRUK leaflet's a good starting point from there, and thinking about whether you can perform those exercises. And it really doesn't matter if it's not a massive amount of exercise. We're not looking at you doing an hour long session once a week. We're looking at 10 minutes a day, which probably is a little bit more than an hour overall, but it's those small habits. We talk about the toothbrush opportunity. So, we all spend a full 3 minutes, honestly, cleaning our teeth every morning, and the same in the evening. That's 6 minutes a day we spend just on those small little things in your mouth, and yet the rest of the body, how long do we do that routine? And if you can find a stretch that you do whilst cleaning your teeth, well, double bonus. Okay, so let's take a little question from the comments, I think. So there's just a few messages with regard to Pilates. A couple of those have come through. Yeah, hi, Nikki. There's a question from you elsewhere. I'll come to in a moment, because I think it wasn't Pilates for you, but yoga. So whether we think about those, I think, yeah, any of these exercises, like I say, if they become a passion and habit, are a good idea. I think you would ideally want to be in a one-to-one class where you learn your Pilates initially, so your instructor can say, okay, yeah, your shoulders don't move as much as some other people's, so let's do this a different way, or let's think about how we can adapt the exercise for you. If you're in a big group Pilates class, when we all get back to big groups, it could be you want to see the instructor beforehand and just say, look, this is the diagnosis I have. It does limit me a little bit with regards to some movements, but also perhaps I'm not going to manage the full 45 minutes of your class. Do you mind if I just sit at the back when I need to get my breath back? Or I'm not going to do exercise number 6 because that always aggravates. Do you mind if I stop? And, the exercise instructors have an awareness of rheumatological diagnoses and should be able to say, yeah, that's fine. Not everyone's going to do 100% of the class. It's about finding a version of it that works for you. that kind of leads into one of the resources that I was going to share, and I am slightly biased in that Ros Smith is also a physiotherapist, and she's got a really nice YouTube channel. It's mostly seated exercises, but it's now I can't quite find where I put that, but it gives you a routine sat in the chair to work on, and I can't remember if it's yoga or Pilates that she does, and I've not scribbled that down. How embarrassing! But there we go. It's a good starter resource from that. So yeah, Pilates shouldn't be a problem to perform, and the same for yoga as well, within whatever limitations you have at that stage. I'll go back to the sent in questions. So the next one is, are there any good apps and online fitness videos you can use to help keep active? So I've mentioned the NHS resources, and there's this Active 10 app, as I said. If what you're looking at is kind of strengthening wise, there's a Strength and Flex podcast that the NHS website has as well. And it's you listen to it as you walk outside, and it tells you to do some standing press ups against a tree or some stretches against a lamppost, which obviously at the moment perhaps we shouldn't be touching trees and lampposts, but it's a slightly different way to think about exercises outdoors and working on cardiovascular and strength fitness there. And kind of other online fitness videos. The Chartered Society of Physiotherapy have just made into videos their joint specific exercise resources. So there's a back pain exercise resource of 5 or 6 exercises, and the same for ankle pain and knee pain. And of course, we're talking about Raynaud's and Scleroderma here, but you may well have joint specific problems, which is part of the diagnosis for some people, but also it's just another additional thing to live with for others. So thinking about how you do those exercises as well. So this is quite nice, because the next question I've got written on the sheet is very similar to one that Melanie's just posted. So thanks very much. I don't know if it was you that posted the initial question. The question online is there many exercises I can do with limited lung function and with ambulatory oxygen? And the question we got sent before was, how much exercise is too much, and what's the most beneficial for lung involvement, scleroderma? So I did a bit of research this afternoon on this, and the kind of the go-to paper for exercise in scleroderma, recently-ish released a couple of years ago by a combination of the team in Brazil and in Stockholm, Sweden. They suggested that there's around 35 to 50% of people have lung fibrosis as part of their scleroderma, and about 20% have pulmonary artery hypertension. So these lung problems are quite common in people with scleroderma, and we have to think about how does that impact on your ability to do the exercises? Well, firstly, from a stretch point of view, hopefully the stretch is in a seated position, or even if they're stood up, are fairly gentle on the lung capacity. So they should become a regular habit. The cardiovascular work. So there's this really nice study that I think came out of Italy in 2009. In fact, sorry, it was Brazil as well. So there was 2 studies fairly simultaneously, and they looked at working people either on a treadmill in the Brazilian study or in a gym-based exercise group in the other study, those with lung limitations of their scleroderma versus those without. And what they found in both of those studies was actually both groups could and did improve. So it is possible to improve your cardiovascular fitness, your heart and lung function, despite the limitations of the scleroderma, perhaps on the lung fibrosis or pulmonary artery hypertension. So it is worth trying to push yourself cardiovascularly. Going to Melanie's point specifically, well, ambulatory oxygen is going to be a challenge if that's a little tube you have to carry with you everywhere you go. Then I suppose your cardiovascular will be on an exercise bike or on a treadmill or something. Something like that. So I guess it's allowing yourself to still push your cardiovascular limits whilst having your oxygen supply nearby. There's the Borg Scale is quite a nice thing to think about. So the Borg Scale is used in exercise studies where you don't have heart rate monitors. Now, some of you may already have smart technology that you wear on your wrist or somewhere else that tells you your heart rate. And if it does, that's a great way to see how hard you're working and how you might push it. But the Borg scale is a free alternative, and the Borg scale asks you to think about how intensive the exercise feels to you, and you score it rather peculiarly from 6 to it's dead easy to 20 it's terrifically tough work. And scoring between 6 and 20, you need to be exercising at 10 or 11 or maybe more to get cardiovascular benefits. And there is a little link somewhere of that score that Paula was already sharing some great stuff, so that will ping up, I'd imagine. No moment, no pressure, Paula. That scale gives you a chance to score how you're getting on. And the reason it's really nice is it starts at 6 and it ends at 20. And if you put a 0 at the end of that score, it matches quite well with your heart rate. So I've tried this recently in my lockdown. I haven't done a lot of exercise, but when I have, I've tried to be a bit more scientific about it. And with a heart rate monitor, I've looked at what my heart rate is, and it does match very well with how I'm feeling, how out of breath I'm feeling. And if you want to work on high intensity interval training, which we'll talk about in a bit, you want to be getting about 80% of your maximum heart rate. So your maximum heart rate is 220 minus your age. So for me, it's 177. And that gives me an idea of what my maximum target is. And therefore, I worked out if I want to get 80 to 85%, it's about 150 to 160 heart rate. I want to push myself to. And that gives you a target for where you want to be pushing yourself with your heart rate. And obviously, your lung function will impact on how well you can access that heart rate. So it's a way to at least monitor what you're doing and make sure it's progressing at the correct rate for you. So yeah, you can exercise despite perhaps lung limitations. Maybe you're doing too much if you're sore a day after or 2 days after, muscle ache. If you're still tired the next day, then perhaps you've overused your energy resources on your exercise. And if you're getting unusual feelings when you're exercising, please, don't push yourself too much from that point of view. That moves on fairly nicely to the next question, which is, it says, I suffer from fatigue and I'm finding it difficult to exercise. Is there any exercise which improves fatigue management? So there is a natural fatigue that comes with living with any long-term condition, in that it's rather draining on your resources, but also with scleroderma being an inflammatory condition, the inflammation will also take away some of your body's energy resources as well. So fatigue is a common issue. With regards to exercises for fatigue management, well, the crucial thing is graded exercise. So graded exercise is not a new idea. It's a slightly controversial term in some fields, but in simplicity, graded exercise means monitoring your current levels and then taking it up by a little bit each week. And we talk about the 2 to 5% rule. So you look at what you can do at the moment comfortably, not feeling sore the next day, and then you can increase that by between 2 and 5% a week. So if it's walking 1,000 meters, the next week you'd do 1,050, and it's gradually stepping that up to try and combat the fatigue. Of course, fatigue can be related to your medications, and I'm not really going to talk about medications today, but it's worth just checking with your rheumatologist or whoever's keeping an eye on your medications that there isn't anything there that could explain fatigue if it's become a new issue. But if it's a long-standing part of your condition, it's a difficult one to manage medically. But knowing what you're doing exercise-wise, knowing what you're doing energy-wise can help to pace your activities and manage it from that point of view. So the next question moves on to Raynaud's specifically, and it asks what the most effective exercises are to help to improve the Raynaud symptoms, the cold hands, the cold feet. And I must admit, I wrote an article about this for the Scleroderma magazine, and I thought, oh, well, I'll just find it online. And when I looked for it, I realised I wrote it 8 years ago, so it's lost in the midst of time, and maybe I should re-release it at some point. But I'm going to read from it because it is a little bit less well formed in my memory. And what I suggested, or looking at the evidence, there's a number of exercises that are recommended: wriggling the toes, tapping the foot, clenching the fist, moving the arms. The resource I looked at mentioned large overhead circles with the arms, which sounds a bit like helicopter type movements, but I think pendulum exercises can be as good as that, whilst also being achievable for more people and probably a bit safer than swinging the arms all over the place. So the pendulum exercise is when you're stood up with the arm dangling. Can I get that on shot? Yeah. And just letting it swing, rather like a pendulum, forwards, backwards, side to side, round and round. And if you want, whilst you're doing that, you can clench your fist, perhaps on a softball, get the circulation going through the muscles there. And those kind of simple exercises to increase the activity of the muscles at the periphery, your fingertips, your toes. But also, we know that a lot of our blood flow sits down in the calves. And if we activate our calf muscles, that can pump the blood around and just compensate for some of the limitations in your blood flow of the Raynaud. So calf raises, work on the bottom step, perhaps, that kind of thing. Next question, I think this is question number 9. I love cycling and swimming. I'm unable to do these activities because I'm shielding. What alternative exercises would be good for someone with scleroderma? So this person loves cycling and swimming, so I presume they're fairly active, in which case it could be the NHS Live Well site, which has a resource of 6 different categories of exercise videos, and their strengthening exercises or their balance and posture exercises. And actually, that's a good plug for Paula's balance and posture exercises, or certainly balance exercises that you may be getting a view of fairly soon. But the NHS Live Well has got some broad exercises from those points of view. If you love cycling, like I said, it could be the exercise bike at home, gives you some simulation of that. Swimming is pretty much out unless you're brave enough to go to a lake or a river, I think was mentioned in the news yesterday. But what alternatives would be good for you? I mean, I think anything in water is fantastic because the joints are a bit more loosened off. The heat of the water can help with the scleroderma skin tightening, or with the Raynaud's for that matter. And actually being in the water makes the lungs work a bit harder because of the hydrostatic pressure against there. So that's a nice exercise when you can do it. Can we simulate water or swimming-based exercises without a pool? No, probably not, but stretches and perhaps a home-based cardiovascular routine of the ones I've mentioned might just compensate for that, and as I say, maybe become a habit that then lives on once the pools are back open. So yeah, I've just seen, I got myself all in a mix about Rod Smith's Tai Chi exercises, of course, and that's what we're looking at. Just looking at Lindsay's notes, yeah, your Pilates, you're doing a small class, supervised by physios, fantastic. Yeah, so small class means you can get the attention, and supervised by physios, great. I'm sure there are some fantastic exercise instructors and other health professionals or exercise professionals that would be equally as good, but just as long as they know what the condition is and can think about your specific version of the Raynaud's or the scleroderma and what they can do from there. Yeah, a message here with regards to yoga from YouTube helps me a lot. Great, fine. If you found something that works for you. And Sarah's just mentioned after 5 or 10 minutes of her exercise, she struggles with fingers and toes going black. Yeah, so as we've talked about with the Raynaud's attack, it's trying to think about, can you warm up your fingers and toes before you exercise? I've got a very memorable a lady I've worked with who had similar problems with her exercise, and she'd go to the treadmill wearing about 15 layers, and gradually as she warmed up, she'd take off a jumper or a coat or one of her 3 sets of gloves or whatever it may be, so that she could still exercise and avoid those flare-ups whilst keeping warm enough. The gyms are problematic for Raynaud's if they have those ice cold air conditioners blowing at you. So, you know, if you need to wear some gloves to do the exercise, then so be it. And if you're in a public gym and people are wondering why, just tell them. You know, I think Raynaud's is such a common problem that probably lots of people are living with it, even if they don't realise. And our gyms should be full of people who are exercising despite some medical issues. So yeah, I think that's hopefully a little bit of an answer there. So the final question that was pre-sent, it says, I live alone and I'm self-isolating. When I'm exercising at home unsupervised, how do I know if I've done too much? Yeah, okay. So I was going to talk about running the marathon, which I've never done, and I don't know if any of you have. But there will be some, or there would have been some people running the marathon for SR UK, and fantastic for them. I hope they found some way to still do that fundraising in an alternative manner. But if anybody wants to start running a marathon, they don't just suddenly do it on day one. It takes 3 months of training to build up to that, and programs and long runs and short runs and quick runs and slow runs. And the same can be said for all of us if we're taking on an exercise program. So how do we know if we've done too much? Well, hopefully experience is the first thing. If you usually use the exercise bike and you know what you should normally cope with, then try and stick to that. And the body is a funny thing in that if we're on a good day, we can con ourselves that we are much better than we have been previously and accidentally do too much. And when we talk about pacing activities and graded exercise, the biggest challenge usually when we're working with somebody one-to-one is not necessarily forcing you to do more, but rather it's saying, actually, you've probably done a bit more than what was prescribed at this stage, and just keep a lid on it and try not to get too excited about your improvements. There's another question coming up with regards to somebody who used to be an athlete by the looks of things, and that's a challenge as well. So yeah, here it is. It's Nikki, in fact, mentioned I was previously a fit cyclist and walker. I mean, I might have oversold you calling an athlete, excuse me, but a fit cyclist and walker. And if you have had that history where you've been really active, and then suddenly the scleroderma comes and slows things down, it's really hard not to remember your usual targets. And you think, well, I can do a 5K. That's fine. That's me, and I'll do it. And if you do it, you're really struggling. But more importantly, if you don't do it, you beat yourself up for not having done what you used to do 5 years ago, when actually you should be congratulating yourself for doing more than you did 5 minutes ago. So that completes the 10 questions that we got sent in advance. So the ones that came through this morning, I've had less time to prepare, so I'm going to talk even less effectively around those areas, but hopefully there's some useful stuff you're getting from here. So we've got some names here, and this is Roisin who messaged in this morning talking about having been recently diagnosed with the limited form of systemic sclerosis. And she asked if this could be the reason for the constant bursitis in her knees, hips, and elbows, and also the plantar fasciitis, and also the muscle stiffness. So bursitis is inflammation or swelling of what should normally be a soft tissue structure around a joint. And it is a common finding in rheumatology conditions and inflammatory rheumatology conditions. It can be seen fairly regularly in people with scleroderma as well, that they get joint-specific problems too, and that can limit your ability to exercise. So Roisin goes on to say she's been attending physio for 9 months. Wow, this is very good service you're being offered. And the physio can't work out why my muscles are always so stiff and that they go into spasm every time she tries to massage them. It'd be great to know if it's related. Yeah, quite possibly this is part of the scleroderma. It's a bit hard to assess just from a paragraph read there, but it can present at the joints, and certainly the muscle stiffness, perhaps some pain-associated muscle spasm can be a part of the presentation. It's worth getting that checked to see if there's anything specific, because although you have scleroderma, that doesn't stop you from getting an elbow bursitis from decorating too much one weekend or something like that. So there's still possible to have joint specific areas, but with you listing knees, hips, elbows and plantar fascia, it does sound like there might be something body wide that's driving that. It could be worth mentioning the level of inflammation you're having when you next see your rheumatologist, to see if there's any management options they could offer, or just gradually working through each of those with some local treatments. It sounds like your physio is already doing that. I mean, as you mentioned, recently diagnosed, as I said at the beginning of today's talk, there is that period over the first 18 months where things tend to be worse and harder to control for us from an activity and exercise point of view. So maybe you're in that early stage and things will start to level off a little bit in the near future. So I've mentioned Nikki's question, and hi, you've been on the Facebook here, and she's mentioned that she was diagnosed with overlap, so polymyositis and scleroderma, and the diagnosis was a year and a half ago, something like that. And Nikki described not being able to get off the floor normally, not being able to squat unless you support your weight through your arms, losing flexibility through the hips, tiredness in the arms, and finding it quite hard going when walking up hills or walking up steps. You're saying you struggle to jump from side to side. In fact, jumping is not even possible itself, and that you are a yoga teacher and a previously fit cyclist and walker. Is it possible you'll regain your fitness, strength, and muscle endurance? Yeah, of course, it's possible that will come back. It will be slow, and we know if you've had a period where the scleroderma is more active and limiting your capabilities, you will potentially lose muscle fibers that don't grow back, and therefore the fibers you do have to work harder for the same amount of activity. So there is, if you look in very old books, you'll find this idea of progressive systemic sclerosis, and the word progressive has disappeared from the diagnosis 20, 30 years ago, and there's not necessarily a progressive element to your fitness capabilities living with scleroderma. So it's not a downward slope. There are ways to actually get back to a degree of the exercises you used to be able to do, the capabilities you used to be able to have. Nikki just mentioned here, I recently tried some Fit in 5 exercise classes on the TV, but I had to give up as I had to rest for over 24 hours. And that's what I've talked about is, unfortunately, Fit in 5, I presume that's a 5-minute program, but obviously that was too much. And that doesn't necessarily mean you need to be moved to Fit in 3, but maybe it's less enthusiasm, taking it down a little bit on the Borg scale, for instance, there, and working at a comfortable level that feels appropriate for now, rather than perhaps the exercise level you've always worked at previously when you were fit and active before the scleroderma, and accept that exercise at a light level performed regularly is better than trying to push it too far. So yeah, it's tough if even a small amount of exercise then causes a 24-hour flare. How you deal with then finding the right level, and it's being happy with the level that you do find, even if it doesn't feel as much as you might like. Let's have a look at a question coming through. This is Elaine has messaged, I love to walk, but I tripped last year twice and banged my head and broke my arm. I'm very scared to walk now as I can't catch my balance if I start to fall. Any suggestions on safe exercise with the diagnosis of limited scleroderma and Raynaud's? So this is tough, isn't it? I don't know what your balance was like prior to these trips, but perhaps that was a part of it. But the broken arm will have limited you for a while, I guess. And yeah, it's right to be fearful of walking if your balance isn't as good as it should be. And there's a natural fear that stops us doing crazy things that might cause us damage. And there's also perhaps a fear that needs to be overcome to get you walking again. But I think a stepped approach is wise here. So you're right, walking out perhaps by yourself could be more of a challenge, but is there a way to work on balance exercises at home? Perhaps you could do, walking on the spot, working on the exercise, that kind of way, and challenging your balance a little bit with that, building it up. If you've got somebody that can walk with you, at the moment they'd be 2 meters away, but hopefully they'll be nearer in time so that you can have that support if you do feel less stable. And actually, there's probably a relevance for you with monitoring how far you can walk. And like I said, with the Map My Walk option or a pedometer or some other kind of device that will tell you how you're getting on your phone, an app, for instance, it could be that actually knowing when's enough and turning back at that point before the balance becomes challenging. And again, if it's just a short walk, well, it's more than it might have been previous. So I've got two more questions here to go through, and the next one comes from Lindsay, and she says, due to shielding, I'm missing my usual 25-minute 25-minute walk, excuse me, to and from work, and the consequence seems to be increased fatigue and pain. Yeah, so can you recommend some cardiovascular exercise that will not exacerbate fibromyalgia? So yeah, I work in fibromyalgia as well. It's a difficult condition to manage with regards to the pain and the exercise limits, and having that potentially, Lindsay, in combination with scleroderma or perhaps with Raynaud's, I can see that you're shielding, so perhaps there is scleroderma as your other diagnosis. Yeah, you're missing that 25-minute walk to and from work, and we're all missing some of those routines that would be normal exercise for us. Like I said, this survey from Sport England implies we're probably less active than prior to the lockdown, even though maybe we're all a little bit less busy, or maybe some of us are a little bit less busy. Um, so yeah, if you're shielding, obviously you can't manage a 25-minute walk outside because you're in your own property. Um, can you convince yourself to do a 25-minute walk on the spot or up and down the stairs or something like that? It's quite hard work if it's not going to work. Have you got a favourite podcast you could listen to whilst you're doing that to distract you from the tedium of walking on the spot? Yeah, it would make sense if you're missing that exercise, you may be more fatigued, and yeah, the pain might be somewhat worse on that. If walking's the thing, walking on the spot, it could be some of the online resources that we've talked about uh, already. Yeah, finding something that works for you. And equally, if it is 25 minutes walk to work and 25 minutes walk back, that's 50 minutes of presumably fairly moderate exercise. And you could replicate that doing kind of half as much, so 25 minutes of slightly more vigorous exercise. And that would at least mean it's a shorter time period of doing a less exciting exercise than perhaps the walk to work would be, taking in the scenery and all the lovely things that are now missing with shielding. Um, and that leads me into another question that I've not seen specifically come through, but it's with regards to what kind of intensity of exercise should we be looking at. And I just wanted to mention there's a study from Sheffield that's just completed looking at high intensity interval training based on the upper limbs. And I'm pretty sure that Henrik in Sweden was doing similar work when I visited him a couple of years ago. And is there a level of exercise that's appropriate for someone with scleroderma? The feedback from these studies, and this is probably the same across lots of rheumatological diagnoses, is that high intensity is okay, and you can really push your heart and lungs to kind of 80% maximum heart rate and get away with it. And a short burst high intensity or an interval within that high intensity training might be a way to work on cardiovascular fitness whilst not taking too much of your time or not being too much of a drag to perform. So there's not necessarily a reason to push oneself with that. If you do have lung problems, breathing restrictions, then your heart will work at that higher rate earlier in your exercise. So although you'll obviously have problems with your lungs, it does mean you get a higher level of heart workout for the same amount of exercise. So you can push yourself within a shorter period to get the same kind of benefits. And then the final question that came through is actually fairly similar to one we had earlier. So Trisha's just messaged and said, I'd like to ask what I can do to stop myself stooping and leaning forwards when I stand and walk. So Trisha, this is the problem for lots of people, I guess. Postural changes with aging, but I'm guessing from the question we're looking more at a scleroderma induced postural issue. And as I mentioned, this tightness at the skin, if you do have it on the chest wall or on the neck, can encourage that forwards posture. Anybody living in pain will tend to have a hunched forwards posture. And if we're less active and spend more time sitting, it encourages that hunch. So it's trying to avoid sitting for too long a period, thinking about your posture when you can. And for some people, we have to think about the balance of your pain relief. And I'm not going to talk really about medications this evening, but lots of people I talk to are very keen to avoid too much pain relief. I don't really be relying on tablets, and I think that's fair in some ways. Now, I'm not talking about your scleroderma specific tablets. Please, you have to rely on them. That's part of the deal. But with your pain relief tablets, there can be some flex with them, and some people I have to have a bit of a chat and say, okay, so you're struggling with your day-to-day function. Your posture's got worse from when we measured you last year. Perhaps you're not actually taking enough of the pain relief. And if you were to take it more regularly, even if it's paracetamol, taking it more regularly might just allow you to work on your posture, work on your movements, and having sufficient pain relief to do the things you love doing or you need to do probably outweighs the frustration of taking so many tablets or potentially the side effects if they're not massively problematic. So yeah, that balance of ensuring you can keep as active as you can with your disease as well controlled as it can be. So so far as Facebook comments go, the ones that were sent in advance, I think I have completed now. So let me just scroll through and have a look at all you lovely people who've kindly taken your time to watch today and to message. So Nikki, I think you messaged before I attempted to answer your question. You're right. What is the realistic recovery of muscle endurance? So if you have had a period where you've got weaker, either through the diagnosis or for the diagnosis preventing you to do your normal routines, what is the realistic recovery? Yeah, it very much varies person to person. Um, Certainly, so far as the skin thickening and the tightening, where I've been working with people for probably the longest, it does seem a completely unbalanced, unfair condition, scleroderma, in that we'll see people who keenly follow all of the exercise advice I've given them and are really trying their best to maintain movements and prevent the issues we might see, for instance, the hands. And yet they come back month after month, year after year, and things have got worse despite our best efforts and their best efforts. And perhaps we'll see other people where we kind of get a hunch they're not quite as dedicated to the routines we prescribe them as they might be, and yet they seem to do okay. So it's really hard to predict the potential recovery, but certainly there's not a person I've worked with these diagnoses who hasn't had the potential to improve. And how much of that can we get back will depend on the control of the disease, any longer term fixed action deformities you might pick up, or ulcers potentially, or other problems within that. You mentioned the polymyositis overlap, and we are a specialist centre for myositis here as well, and we do have a number of patients that will measure for their strength for myositis. And again, it seems a lottery that some people do get stronger, whereas others, despite their best intentions, don't. And I'm particularly thinking of the gentleman I work with who we measured his muscles individually through his arms, and there was just one set of muscles that did not improve no matter what we threw at it. And in the end, we had to say, well, we've strengthened all the others, and they'll have to compensate and do the jobs that this other muscle would have previously done. So there are ways round if perhaps all of the individual muscles don't get that improvement. So scrolling through, oh, Z's managed to put up the donate sign. Thanks very much. We've talked about Pilates. Carly's just messaged, I have a question, but I understand it might not be reached. I'm just not sure when to call my rheumatologist. Either an excess of crafting or baking has now left me with incredibly sore wrists and makes grip difficult. Okay, so which exercises are good to combat this, or is the answer to do fewer crafts? Oh, I really hope the answer isn't to do fewer crafts, because if you've got a hobby, or maybe that's a job, who knows, that you enjoy, you've got to keep doing it somehow or another. Yes, perhaps it was all too much all at once and you identified the excess there. But it's now managing to control the pain at the wrists and getting the grip back. It could be and you mentioned Salford, so you'd be very much open to our hand therapy team who could assess your wrists and perhaps look at wrist splints, not to be worn all the time, but perhaps for a few hours of the day just to rest the wrists whilst they recover from this flare. And I'm not asking everyone to come to Salford. You will have an occupational therapist or hand therapist somewhere near you who will be able to look at your wrist or hand function and provide splint supports as required. Which exercises are good to do to combat this? So hand function wise, yeah, I mean, the crafting and the baking are exercises themselves, and there's no reason you can't claim that you've done a fantastic workout at the end of your crafting or baking, because it is exercise. Any repetitive movement where you're working the muscles is considered exercise. So that is the exercise itself. It's just finding the right amount that isn't excessive. If you want to think about your muscle strength outside of those activities, we quite like putty as an option to work on hand strength, or you can get these trainers that pianists use or guitar players use that have little springs in them for each of the individual fingers that you can press down on. I guess trombone players would probably do that as well, or something like that. That kind of machine for £10 or so could be an option. And I couldn't do this session without mentioning the wax bath. And some of you who've known me for a number of years will know that SRFT, or sorry, SRUK, excuse me, it's late in the day, SRUK and their predecessors kindly funded me to do a 1 day a week, 18-month project looking at the use of wax baths and hand exercises for people with scleroderma. And perhaps some of you are on here watching this, and I must say thank you to the 36 willing volunteers who assisted me with this research. I hope the wax bath is still of use to you, and if you need some more wax, you know where I am. We've got a little bit left over still a number of years later, but we were hoping that the warm wax, for those patients who don't have ulcers and whose hands can tolerate going into this bath, would significantly improve strength, movement, and decrease pain for people with problems with their hands with scleroderma and or Raynaud's. And the study wasn't scientifically able to definitively prove that, but we did show improvements for everyone doing either the hand exercises or the hand exercises plus wax bath. I'm not a salesman for the wax bath. It's not something I can recommend going out to buy, but if you know somebody who's got one, or if you wanted to look at a cheaper model, the wax can be effective in allowing you to then use the exercises, the hands, once they're warmed up. When we presented that study at the World Scleroderma meeting, next door to me, or maybe 2 posters down, was a research team from Denmark, and they'd done a study comparing their wax bath to putting your hands in warm water with perhaps a pair of marigolds on or gloves on, and they couldn't elucidate any difference between the hot water and the wax bath. So perhaps the conclusion is bathing the hands in sufficiently warm water. So we're talking about 50 to 60 degrees centigrade. So it's your hot tap, basically there. Hands in, protected with gloves or something for 5-10 minutes before you then exercise can actually give you a better outcome, we think. You know, the 36 people, as I said, who helped us with the study, it's not quite enough to say the wax bath is dead and buried, but perhaps it's manageable with warm water as an option for that. So asthma, oh yes, we've got another baker on here. Thanks for your support of Carly's issues there. Yeah, bakers and crafters will get problems with persistent movement of those, but equally it's a beautiful exercise to be doing regularly for our most important tools, our hands, really. Let me just scroll down and check I've not missed anything else. Yeah, Paula, you're wearing golf gloves in the gym and have your arms covered. Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. That seems very sensible. Other message. There's a question about taking zinc from Carolina. I'm sorry, I'm not qualified to answer that, with apologies. Jane's written about her Raynaud's and that her white fingers seem to be getting worse and more painful. Even running when I'm hot elsewhere, my fingers are white. Can you suggest anything natural I could take? I prefer not to take medication. Yeah, I wouldn't particularly think about supplements because there's not much evidence behind those, but a pair of gloves when you're running to maintain the heat, there's a good plan. Personally, I'm a massive fan of the silver glove. The evidence is not fantastic for it, but these gloves have elements of silver. The 8%, I think, is the one I've always used, but there's a 12% version that just helps maintain the heat in the hands. And if you have to run in gloves, that's probably a better option than not running or getting the problems with the fingers there. I should say for me, my silver gloves are because I cycle to work every day, and in the winter I need that second layer just to maintain the heat on a 40-minute or so journey. And the silver gloves have been an absolute godsend for me. I don't have Raynaud's, I do get cold hands, and perhaps exercising with gloves on is becoming more acceptable these days. Here's Sarah or Sarah. I use the putty. Fantastic. Yes, a hand putty. Squeeze it. Keep the strength going. Exercise your fingers with an elastic band. Brilliant. Stretching the band by opening and closing the fingers. Perfect. Yeah. So there is a risk if all you do is squeezing, you'll strengthen these muscles, but not the ones that pull out. So an elastic band. Can I show you this between thumb and finger and pulling out against it can be a nice way to work on the opposite muscle groups. Okay, everyone's sending their thanks. I think you've all got far better places to go than to listen to me, as we've just gone 7 o'clock. So I'll finish by saying thank you very much to all of you who've contributed some really lovely comments and some nice sharing there. Good questions coming through. I hope some good answers as well. Please come back to this. I'll try and add some comments with some other resources at the end of this feed. Thanks to Paula for assisting with filling in for some of my absences on the information there and for sharing some of the content. And thanks very much to SI UK for allowing me this opportunity to put the message out there. As I said at the beginning, please do get in touch with me if you have physio-specific questions that you're struggling to answer elsewhere. Probably via Twitter is the easiest option for that, or go through SI UK. They've got some good exercise resources, and certainly with Paula coming on board, we're trying to update those and make them a bit more advanced in the information that's on there, and we'll perhaps look at links to resources that could be useful outside of SI UK as well, such as those NHS sites I mentioned. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining us. And I'll hopefully speak to you again. Keep safe, keep active, and I'm signing out for now. Bye.